Well, thank you very much for inviting me to this presentation about Siberia Souls, our art project that I've been involved with now for more than a decade, in a sense. A special thanks for Theo Herbst, who's organized this entire conference, and for inviting me, and for Darius Plioplys, who made all of this possible. It's been wonderful collaborating with him on this project, and our final result really is, I think, a very impressive one. Thank you, both of you. And thank all of you for attending and listening today. The photograph here is of a family that were deported to Siberia, the Shakis family. Aldute is sitting there next to her father and her two brothers, smaller brothers, and she's writing to her relative in the West, thanking them for the presents that she's received, and saying that I am the second best student in the second grade. And she's very proud of her accomplishment. In the accompanying letter that her mother wrote in the envelope that was sent, her mother explains that Aldute had been just recently diagnosed with tuberculosis, that the physician felt that she really should not be going to school, but he was giving her special permission to do so, as long as her health was holding out. Anyway, so sort of very sad situation of that family being deported to Siberia from Lithuania. This is my grandmother. She was 71 years old when she was deported, a simple farm woman, off in Siberia, given task to chop trees down. And she's sitting there on the stump of a tree that she had to chop down. During NKVD interrogations, 4 of my blood relatives died, and 12 blood relatives were deported to Siberia. Most of them did not return. So that this is really part of my family legacy, is the terrors that were caused by Stalin and what we had to go through. Blood relatives. From Lithuania alone, about 130,000 people were sent to Siberia, deported under Stalin's regime for labor purposes, to labor camps. 70% of them were women and children, and 300,000 died out of them. In addition, there were 150,000 deported to gulags, prison camps, where the vast majority of everyone died there. All in all, and that's just for Lithuania, a small country. All in all, the estimates are that Stalin was responsible for 10 to 20 million deaths. Now, when I was growing up in Canada and in the United States, what really stunned me was the historical imbalance. The imbalance between what people know about Hitler and what they know about Stalin. Everybody knows about Hitler and the atrocities that he did, but nobody knew anything about Stalin. It was just totally forgotten about it. The Holocaust, everyone knows about it, but what Stalin did, nobody knows anything about it. To me, it was just a stunning divergence, and Stalin killed many more people than Hitler did. Beyond that was the imbalance in justice. What happened to the perpetrators, the Nazis? There were Nuremberg trials, and people are still being hunted down, even now, for the atrocities that they did. Communists, nothing. Absolutely no accountability for the mass murder that was done. Well, a little over a decade ago, it was the anniversary of the beginnings of the mass deportations from Lithuania to Siberia. I approached Stanley Balzakas, the president of the Balzakas Museum, with the idea of doing a program to commemorate these victims, to bring this out to the general public so that people would know about it. And a whole number of individuals really helped out tremendously. Rita Jans at the museum, Sigita Balzakas, Irena Balzakas, and my daughter Shinya Plioplys all helped out tremendously in setting this entire project up and getting it running. And we called it the Hope and Spirit Project. This was the 70th anniversary of the beginnings of the mass deportations that took place. I wanted to have something, we could have called it Death and Deportation, But that would have been a very bleak title for something that happened, even though it was a bleak event. I wanted to have something a little bit more positive as the logo for this entire project. And even though the circumstances were very, very difficult, and many, many people died as a consequence of it, still hope and spirit lived on. And in Lithuanian people, it lived on. And in 1990, the existence of that hope and spirit manifested itself with independent Lithuania, so that it was impossible to get rid of the hope and spirit. And so I wanted to celebrate, despite the adversities, that hope and spirit can survive. And that's why the title was as is. The purpose was to educate the public. And history repeats itself. And it turns out that this was a prophetic exhibit. History is repeating itself right now. The war is ongoing right now. This is 1939, September, a meeting that took place in Moscow. Stalin, and next to him is standing emissary from Adolf Hitler, Ribbentrop. And they signed an agreement known as the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, a secret agreement at that time, now very well known. And this is what started World War II. This again is Stalin with Ribbentrop. And a map of Europe, where they both signed on it, where they divided Europe amongst themselves. Hitler and Stalin divided Europe between themselves. And Joseph Stalin's signature is right on the top here and Ribbentrop on the bottom on the map of Europe in terms of symbolically dividing the territory. Now, the deportations that took place from Lithuania were two types. One into gulags, which were prisons. These were more death chambers. And then the slave labor camps, which were basically mandatory labor, where my relatives were deported to. And in these camps, labor camps, the circumstances that people faced were very, very different. It depended so much on the location, on how many other people were there, and the geography of it, so that people's experience was very varied. The crime that resulted in this kind of deportation was, for the most part, ownership. You own something. In other words, you had a vested interest to be a potential enemy of the new social order. You owned a violin and you knew how to play it. You owned a piano. You had an education. You were a teacher. You were a lawyer. Or you owned a small family farm, which is what my blood relatives had. You're a threat to the future new social order. Off to Siberia with you, and hopefully you'll die there. Now, the places that people were deported to for labor were industries for forestry, mining, agriculture, and fishing, primarily. And Lithuania is a small little green area to the far left of this image, small country, and this is a big expanse of Russia and Siberia, and all of the locations where people from Lithuania were deported to for their labor camps. It's a vast territory. These are examples of people being apprehended and forced into cattle cars. The people in the top picture are being assembled at the train cattle car, and then the car sealed, and they're ready to be shipped off to Siberia. Again, pictures of women in one of these cars, and children being deported to Siberia. Juozas Kazlauskas in 1989 was able to go back to Siberia, deportation sites, and do photography, including going with other people who survived a deportation. As a child, he was deported to Siberia, and he grew up there. So he had personal experience and wanted to photograph these areas. And his photographs are absolutely iconic. And I was able to purchase a set of his original prints from his widow. And some of these images are very, very moving ones. Of 1989, the sites of deportation in Siberia, where Lithuanians were deported to. Now, these are individuals who accompanied him who also were deported, and they're at the prison camps where they were incarcerated. Stunning photographs of individuals where they were imprisoned. And you have generations. You have the father whose back is turned to us, was deported, explaining what happened to him to his son. And here you have three generations. The grandmother was the one who was deported, with her daughter and grandson experiencing the reality of life in Siberia. A cemetery in Siberia. And then some of the unsightly scenes that as soon as Kozlauskas took these photographs, started showing them, teams from Russia came out there to clean these areas up. It was such an embarrassment, such that the only documentation of this kind of sites is Kozlauskas' photographs. They were cleaned up shortly afterwards. And a Jewish person died in deportation. And what's little known is that Stalin had killed many, many more Jews than Hitler had done. That is until Hitler invaded Poland. One of the noted people who were deported from Lithuania is this fella, Menachem Begin, who eventually ended up in being the first prime minister of Israel. Now, in 1981, a book was published, Lietuviai Sibire, Lithuanians in Siberia, where there was a lot of documentary material, photographs, and letters were published. And the material was sent in to the editor of Draugas, a newspaper at that time, in response to requests that had been repeatedly done in the 1970s to obtain this material so he could publish books about it. And the original material, we tried to find it, and it seemed to have disappeared entirely. It was only after repeatedly going through the archives over and over and over again that we were able to find mislabeled boxes and found about a third of the original material that had been sent in, that was used in this book. And these include 230 original photographs, 226 original letters, many written by children, and the envelopes that they were sent in. And these were then used in the display, the Open Spirit exhibit and program, which went on for more than a year at the Balzakis Museum of Lithuanian Culture in Chicago. Now, another book that was published from that material, We Fled from Terror, is the title. Article, a chapter of it was by Elena Plioplys, a distant relative of mine, and excerpts from her diary, 250-page diary, were published in this thing. And what's stunning about it, there's the circumstances of her life. Now, this is in Poland. She escaped from Lithuania and fled west and got trapped in Poland in the communist world there. And it was a sort of terror that she had to go through. Because the roaming communist forces were very brutal to women. And she, with 5 other teenage women, got shelter in the farm of a Polish farmer, and who had set up a separate area for them to hide during the daytime. And during the days, the 5 girls would be under the roof in a secret steps that they would climb up there, hiding away from being caught and brutally misused. This went on for almost a full year, and these are drawings that she made herself of that experience. Now, what we have, she only have 2 pages of her original diary. The rest of it is missing. And it's very sad because what was taken out was all the human interest part of it, and this would have been a Lithuanian version of the diary of Anne Frank, basically, and what we have left is just historical details which don't have the human sort of content associated with it. Regrettably so. Now, getting back to the exhibit. You take the elevator up to the 3rd floor, the doors are open, and you're greeted with children being at deportation sites in Siberia. And then you get off the elevator, and barbed wire, so you wouldn't try to escape. And a series of historical posters. These were the Chronicle of Violence, 18 historical posters, which I obtained from a Genocide Research and Resistance Center in Lithuania. And then the letters and all the other material was put on display. I wanted to have children get involved in this thing so they become educated, and across the United States and North America actually, asked kids to send in, talk to their parents, their grandparents about what deportation to Siberia was all about, and to come up with images, photographs, and then they sent these paintings in, drawings, and we had a jury commission select the best ones, and awards were given out to kids by age brackets, and some of them I'm just going to show you from New Jersey. One child's impression of deportation taking place, a girl from Wisconsin, another one from Indiana, another train from Toronto, from Ohio. And this one I particularly like. This was an unexpected one. And now these are people, these are families that were deported. And certainly it was difficult, and certainly a lot of death took place. But people are people, and people did have fun out there. And there were beautiful days, and there were sunny, wintry days, and there were dog sleds, and there were children, and they did have fun out there. So that not everything in Siberian deportation was terrible. And so that this was picked up on in this beautiful painting. A school, Lithuanian school in New York, asked kids to write little essays about their family history in relation to deportation. And what was interesting in these stories here is that it was their grandparents who actually, in all cases, all 5 families here, left Lithuania, came to the United States prior to World War I to amass some wealth. And after Lithuania became independent in the 1920s, they all moved back to Lithuania and got family farms. So they had things. They had their farms, they had their life, and being from the United States, their kids were American citizens. And then Stalin showed up, and they ended up being deported to Siberia. Their kids ended up fleeing to the United States, and their grandchildren are now writing about it. So it's an ironic situation in these 5 families. The display here of the exhibit itself. These are the Kozlauskas photographs that were shown. A president of Lithuania was deported to Siberia and almost died there. His granddaughter prepared this display about his own personal history, Stulginskas. Elena UCT was a mathematics teacher, high school teacher, who helped out with the resistance movement and was apprehended and deported to Siberia. And she brought back, when she was released from Lithuania, a lot of items from her deportation and wrote books about her experiences there. And she's, in these photographs, she's working on the Trans-Siberian Railroad, and she had to wear a number on her front and her back to identify her. And she then has photographs of herself and has the number on display here. And what's interesting, here's a sign that was put up indicating that you can't go past this point. It was forbidden to go past the sign. And so not only did she bring back from Siberia a photograph of the sign, but she brought back the sign itself. It's kind of interesting. Remeriana was an artist, and she, in her time of deportation, did some drawings, and which were on display during the exhibit. And then receipts for the material that were sent for people to survive. I know my parents and my other uncles regularly bought materials and sent them to our relatives in Lithuania and in Siberia to provide for them, for clothing, food on a very regular basis. And even in my own family situation, things were difficult, very difficult financially. Still, it was possible to send material of support to help out people who are facing depravity, facing starvation. And these are receipts for some of the materials that were sent out there. Letters written by children. Thank you letters for the materials that they received. Now, these sets of letters all have stories associated with them. I have a summary of these are available on my website, Hope and Spirit website. You can go in there and have a little lowdown in terms of the content of what these letters contain. There's a particularly moving set of letters from 1941 leading to the demise of this a very unfortunate individual in Siberia. Here are photographs where a mother is burying one child and a few months later, funeral of her second child. Both from depravity, died in Siberia. Here is a 15-year-old at his funeral of his parents and siblings standing next to him, and instead of being in school, he was working in forestry, and a lumbering forestry accident happened, and a tree fell down on him and killed him. This is a woman with her son in Siberia. Her husband lived in Ontario, in northern Ontario, and rather strange that their correspondence back and forth went through an intermediary, Mr. Bukis in Toronto. And it's entirely unknown why they had to use an intermediary, why they couldn't. So everything she wrote went to him, and Bukis would send the packages and all of the survival materials that were given to him by her husband, but he had to repackage everything and ship it out to Lithuania. Again, an interesting story here of a woman that received cash from $50, which is at that time quite a bit of sum of money right now, and then all the difficulty she had of actually exchanging it into rubles, and the amount of money it cost her to actually for transportation and to get it exchanged almost was $50. So she was writing to her relatives, please don't send any more money, just send supply items, thank you. And this is an unusual series of correspondences, which I didn't realize occurred until I read this set of letters, and it actually shows up in other correspondences. This is a family that was deported. They were all together, and after the time was served, were ready to return. They had packed everything up, and at the last minute decided not to go back to Lithuania. They stayed in Siberia. And their explanation in this letter that they're writing is that they have many friends of theirs who were deported to Siberia, who went to Lithuania and have found the existence there to be terrible. And some of them actually have returned to Siberia. And why was their existence, you'd think going back to your home country would be wonderful. Well, what happened is that there was a change in the world out there. It went from being a free society from which they were expelled to being this communistic-minded society, and they are returning now labeled as criminals. They were coming back from prison for many years, and they were all criminals. And they were treated by the society, by many members of society, as criminals. And it was just intolerable. So this family here, this picture that I'm showing here, decided not to risk that and simply thought that their life in Siberia was actually going to be better to stay there. So they stayed. And this is a child who's not even 1 year old, writing to his relative in London, England, thanking him for the gifts that he's receiving in this beautiful penmanship. It's remarkable how advanced kids growing up in Siberia are in terms of their language skills. I'm kidding. We also had a lot of poetry readings, a session of songs from Siberia, and readings of letters from Siberia, which were then recorded actually, and I have a whole series of YouTubes about that. And on the my YouTube channel, I just checked this yesterday, and for the letters from Siberia, we already had now 57,000 viewers, so that this material is out there and people are still looking at it. When last time I looked 2 months ago, it was 47,000, so that there still is interest in this, and numbers of people are watching this and learning from the experience of the Lithuanians who were deported. Now, this is exactly a year ago. I was approached by Paulo Gomez. He is now a college student in Brazil, and he asked permission to take my letters from Siberia and other Siberia-related YouTubes and translate them into Portuguese. And he did that, and these are out now on his YouTube channel. So all of the material that I did with the Hope and Spirit Project has been recorded, has now been translated into Portuguese and is available to the Portuguese-speaking world as of a year ago. He also interviewed me about this project in a separate video just about that, subtitled in Portuguese. Here I'm speaking English, but the subtitles are in Portuguese. As part of the program, we had a whole series of films that we showed, including The Way Back, which had received an Academy Award nomination for it in terms of deportation, and then Amissia from Sybaris. At that time, it was still allowed. Russia, a few years ago, canceled permission to do this. And these were groups of mostly young professionals from Lithuania going to the deportation sites to restore what's there. And this is an example from a little over a decade ago that POTUS went on. A group of people for several weeks. They go in luxury, not in cattle cars, out there, and they work on restoring primarily cemeteries where Lithuanians were buried, because these are all are falling apart. And part of the trip there is to meet people living in these distant Siberian communities who are descendants of deported Lithuanians. And some of these people still speak some Lithuanian, some don't, but at least interview them and get their lives' histories documented in addition. Had people who Rimantas and Irena are living in Chicago at the time, and Castulis in Hamilton, Ontario, came down. They were, as children, deported to Siberia, and they grew up in Siberia. So they gave presentations of their lives' experience and shared what happened to them as part of this program. And a lot of this we've videotaped and we have available. Wesley Adamczyk was deported as a child to Siberia, and his father was one of the sacrifices in the Katyn massacre in Poland that took place. Now, Leave Your Tears in Moscow is a book written by Barbara Armonas, and that was recently reissued a decade ago, a new edition of it. And the story here is just, and we had as part of the program, the presentation of this book, and John Armonas, her son, presented his experiences in his book, How I Became a Comrade, because he and his mother were deported to Siberia. How they were released from Siberia is a fascinating story, because what happened was that the father here was a natural-born American citizen, married Barbara, and had children, so that the children were American citizens. Now, when the war broke out, they were had made plans through the United States Embassy in Lithuania to leave, but there was a problem with the paperwork of transportation, such that he and his daughter, left first, and the mother and the son were going to leave the next day. But the front came in, things got messed up. She and her son got apprehended and deported to Siberia, and he and his daughter, and the father and the daughter, ended up in Cleveland, Ohio. So the family separated, and one's living in Cleveland, and the other half is living in Siberia. Now, so that they eventually did end up getting in Copenhagen, reunited. The Donna and Jonas, brother and sister, were reunited, and Barbara and Jonas, the mother and father, were reunited again also in Copenhagen. Now, how this happened is a remarkable story. This image is live television during Khrushchev's visit to the United States. This is that famous visit during which he took off his shoe and pounded the table, claiming that we will bury you. This is live television in Cleveland. This is Donna Armonas kissing Khrushchev's hand and asking Khrushchev, please release my mother and my brother from Siberia. Translators translated it. Khrushchev's response was, yes, definitely, we will do that soon. And this was on live television. And so he had to deliver. And so just a few months later, in Copenhagen, you have this scene taking place. How she got to Khrushchev on live television is amazing, and I have no idea how that happened. But that's an incredible story. And it was even covered on the front page, on the cover of Life magazine, which was the #1 magazine in the United States at that time. And this is John Armonas presiding his book signing at the event that organized at the Balzakis Museum as part of the Hope and Spirit Project. Another book premiere was Children of Siberia, Kids Who Grew Up in Siberia, the English translation of it. And Irena flew in from Los Angeles, Aushra and Vidmantas from Lithuania, and presented their chapters in this book at the official opening of the presentation of the book. We're very honored to have Timothy Snyder, who's a professor of history at Yale University, talk about Bloodlands and the relationship between Hitler and Stalin, a book that had recently published at that time. And he is now a celebrity in the news because he's, besides being an expert in the relations between Hitler and Stalin, is extremely knowledgeable about everything related to the Ukraine. And so he's commonly cited now in relationship to aspects of the Ukrainian war. So it was a tremendous honor to have him come down and participate in the program here in Chicago. Hands Across History, Ruta Shepetis Between Shades of Grey, where a book describing a novel, describing, it's a fiction novel of a teenage girl's experience being deported from Lithuania to Siberia, and Helen Cassidy's memoirs of memories from the Holocaust in Lithuania. We thought it'd be a reasonable, very good thing to have both of them together do a book signing, and it was an honor to have both of them present at this event. The amount of press coverage was incredible. Certainly the Lithuanian media covered a lot of it, and some of the Lithuanian magazines are here. The newspaper on the south side of Chicago, the Southtown News, this was the front page cover of it, in one issue, really bringing it out to the public's attention to educate them about Stalin and what happened. Downtown, Streetwise, a magazine that sold throughout all of downtown Chicago, had a very nice 10-page article with a lot of illustrations, spreading the word. It's a weekly publication. And the main newspaper, Chicago Tribune, had even 2 full pages about this exhibit, which is a remarkable amount of press coverage for this project. WBEZ had a recorded program a decade ago on NPR. It's a national public radio program, so this aired a 15-minute interviews and commentary about the Hope and Spirit Project, aired across the United States on public radio. And this received the most amount of press coverage of any ethnic museum in Chicago's history. So I'm very, very proud. At least my efforts to get the word out at least was successful in what I was able to do in that regard. The American Historical Society had their annual meeting in 2012 and asked that I give a special presentation to them about this project, which I did, and the Board of Directors of Illinois Humanities Council visited it also. I was asked by the St. Vita High School where I graduated to give a presentation to the students there, which I did. Now in the audience there were about 300 kids in attendance, but this was live streamed across the Augustinian High School network, and there were a total of about 5,000 high school students who heard my presentation a decade ago. This entire project was part of the Soviet Arts Experience, which the University of Chicago organized, and included, besides my effort, the Hope and Spirit effort, the Smart Museum of Art and the Art Institute of Chicago. And to me, it was sort of very glaringly evident that this was a successful exhibit. And I had to visit there many times. There were a lot of activities I was involved with. I was documenting a lot of this material here. I was there several times every week for the more than a year that this was up. And the exhibit hall was never empty, ever. There were always people there. So the word did get out and people were visiting it. So that was very, very gratifying. Now, the photographs and the letters from Siberia exist now only because of the effort I put into it. They were lost, mislabeled in archives, and they never would have been brought out if it wasn't for the effort that I put into and dug them out and found them. So I feel a little proprietary interest in them. All of them were imaged and photographed, and images, and these discs were distributed to archives and libraries internationally. So there's materials everywhere available if you wanted to look at it. But I took it myself, since I'm the discoverer of it, and I felt I can use it, and I used it in my own artwork, in my own series of art called Siberia Souls, which is part of this presentation. I created these LED light sculptures, and in these things, there are one set of them is just white LED lights, and the other elements are where the colors are changing constantly. Now, I won't get into the details of the construction and the meaning behind it. That's a part of my entire art world, and that would be a separate talk entirely. But these have been shown, and the first exhibit of them was in 2015. at the Balzacus Museum of the Sculptures. And now this is the same sculpture. It's a semicircular thing hanging on the wall. And here you see photographs of children and lettering and writing from letters that they wrote. And then these are adults who were deported to Siberia. Again, these are wall-hanging sculptures. These particular pieces are about 4.5 feet tall. And these are my relatives, photographs of them deported to Siberia. Now, the exhibit at the Balzacus Museum was honored, being the pick of the week. The Chicago Tribune at that time had a weekly feature where they would pick out the exhibit to see out of all of the art galleries and all the museums in Chicago metropolitan area, and that's a very big territory here. They pick out one museum or one exhibit as the primary one for that week. And this was the only time that, an exhibit at the Balzacus Museum was in this category, pick of the week. So I'm really honored by that. I was invited by, I live on the south side of Chicago, and the local Unitarian church asked me to exhibit the sculptures there, and I did. These are part of the installation that was put up there. And this received a lot of attention, media attention in the local community too, which I was very, very gratified by also. In Grand Rapids, Michigan, before the pandemic, there was an annual event called Art Prize. It's trying now to resurrect itself after the pandemic. And it was the biggest juried art exhibit in the world. The largest number of artists participating with the largest amount of cash prizes. A few years ago, before the pandemic, one of the exhibits was sponsored by the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. This is the primary civil rights organization, human rights organization in the United States. And these are my sculptures, light sculptures on display. These are now just the white LED light sculptures from Siberia, the Siberia Souls. And there's on the side a full explanation of what happened to these individuals so that the public was being informed about Stalin's atrocities. And during 1 month, we had 17,000 visitors. To me, it was very, very gratifying. Now, these are the light sculptures. As the lights are changing, colors are changing. And what I did is I photographed the faces in them as the colors were changing, and then assembled them, and then did digital prints on paper of the same face as it's changing. And the prints on paper are about 2 feet wide, including different individuals. That's a boy, that's a girl who was deported, and with the letters sent by children, and then a young woman from Siberia, and a gentleman. And now these images I used, along with the letters themselves, images on themselves, to create the visual video that I'm working with Darius Plioplys for this conference. So this is the genesis of where these images came from. Now the LED, the way I constructed these LED sculptures and the way you're seeing these images is a different story. I'm not getting into that. But still you have the ghostly qualities of the people deported. You have the color changing effects taking place. You see that. And the letters written by individuals, mostly children, thanking their relatives for the support without which they would have perished in Siberia. So now, just to finish up, the person I worked with a decade ago with the Stanley Balzacus Jr. Took ill afterwards, and the president of the museum, and this is now 3 years ago, photograph, he was the man of the year, and I was asked to actually give him the trophy for the year, and he was in a wheelchair at that time, and kind of was just coming to the museum once in a while. And when he entered, the ceremony was going to take place that weekend, that Wednesday he was brought in on his wheelchair to visit the museum to show him how everything is being done and arranged. And he was unhappy when he was wheeled into the entranceway and saw what was there, and he said, "No, no, 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 no. We have to have Plioplys art up here." And so Rita Jans that afternoon calls me and says, in a panic, says, "You have to get artwork up here immediately." So I had to drop everything, figure out how to frame pieces, get everything pulled together in time for the weekend to install it. And I thought the appropriate thing was the series of prints, Siberia Souls, and which I did and put them up, and they were there up beautifully displayed for the Man of the Year ceremony for Stanley. And these are still up now, more than 3 years later, on the entranceway at the museum. So if you want to, and with the explanation of what happened to these people in Siberia, so still up there at that time. And then I eventually was honored with being Man of the Year because of the work that I did with the Hope and Spirit. And here is a photograph with Dick Durbin, who is he's a senator from the state of Illinois in the United States Congress, and he is probably the number 3 Democrat in the Democratic Party in the United States. So he has a tremendous amount of influence in the government, and he was the Man of the Year before me. So I'm in very, very distinguished company, along with Stanley Blazakis. Now, Stanley passed away a few months after receiving that award, so I was very honored to be able to give him the Man of the Year award while he was still up and functional and understanding what's going on. So thank you very much for listening to my presentation. Further information, there's a lot of material available on the Hope and Spirit website that I set up. Information about families and their individual stories in the letters and in the photographs is up on the Hope and Spirit Network, Hope and Spirit website. On my YouTube channel, if you go back in time, you'll see a lot of the letters from Siberia, and general information about my art is on my general website. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you.